And as Jimzip sat there, scrolling away in the glorious afternoon sunlight and surrounded by his beloved plants, an epiphany.
I think it's time for a second Sprite-based plant pack. Or a second plant-based Sprite pack.
Well, for those of you that have been paying attention, this was the first forest sprite pack that we cobbled together using the wondrous 15 PDX palette, which you can find on lowspec.com. And you can just download it in a handy palette bar, as so, like so. And then you can import that into Pixel using the color import from image feature and locate that image file, and it will just replace your palette. Snappy! Very handy indeed. So we're going to be using that palette for the second Forest Sprite pack that we're going to mix together here. And by mix, I mean draw. So I'm going to start off here with a little tree stump, because I feel like every forest deserves a tree stump or two. No, that's not true. I don't like cutting down trees, but I do think that the Sprite pack would benefit from a tree stump, as if there were some lumberjacks in the area, some industrious ladies or gents who made their living, as it were, from the forest. What am I talking about? Anyway, let's get into the technical aspects a little bit. I'm not so much worried about the dimensions of these sprites. I have a very good idea in my head of how big the main character sprite is in this game, or in general. I mean, I'm creating these sprite packs more as a general purpose, multi-use sprite pack than for any specific game. And you will also notice that later on I do make a slight boo-boo with the mushrooms, which we will get into when we get to that. So as you can see, I've done a tree stump. Now I'm getting into some flowers, and I'm just winging these. I'm not really taking the style of these flowers from any particular source. I just made them up. And I'm also following the golden rule, of course, as usual, which is remembering where our light source is coming from. In this case, it is clearly coming from above, as you can see by the highlights and the shadows underneath all these objects. Nice and simple. Yes. And at this point I figured I needed a couple more colors. So I actually went ahead and created a few more colors and added them to this palette using Peloton.com, which is a really cool resource for coming up with color schemes. Definitely check that out, have a little play, and come up with some swatches of your own. In this case, and I absolutely adore the 15 PDX palette, in this case I needed a little more tropical flavor. I wanted some more punchy colors to add to it. So I did, and this is usually a boo-boo when you're working with a palette, especially a pre-made palette. I don't like tampering with perfection, but sometimes you just need a little extra something. Now, you may notice that we are getting to the much storied giant mushroom section. And just for a second, I really liked what I was doing here with these dangly bits under the mushroom cap. I thought they were quite cool, and they added some interest, and then I got rid of them. I'm not entirely sure why, but that's the dangerous life of being a sprite. One minute you're a cozy pixel sitting all nice on the canvas, and the next minute you ain't, and you deleted. That aside, there was a reason I said that there was a boo-boo with these mushrooms, and you may already have noticed what that is. You may be thinking to yourself, now hold on one cotton-picking second. These mushrooms, they don't conform to the perspective set by the other sprites. Not that I think your voice necessarily sounds like that, but if it does, you, sir or madam or other, you are quite remarkable. And you'd be absolutely right. And this was a small boo-boo on my part. I call this phenomenon the designing pixel sprites while working on two games at once phenomenon. Because at this time I was indeed working on two games at once, a platformer and a top-down RPG, and I got a little carried away while designing these and thought, ooh, mushrooms on the platformer would be cool. And then returned to the RPG-style sprites. So don't be a silly little muffin like I was. Keep your sprites nice and consistent, and your clients will pat you on the back and say, "Hurrah to you, pixel artist, you've done a jolly good job."
Thank you.
Anyway, moving along. Now I decided to do some more flowers, and for these I wanted to be a bit more experimental. I wanted to give them a little more of an alien feel. In fact, in my head I was kind of thinking of more of an elvish kind of forest. So as you can see there, color palette is a little more unusual. We're starting with a purple base for the foliage and the stems, and then going into kind of almost a neon blue for the flowers, which is a highly unusual color for flowers. But I thought that they would add some interest and some strangeness to the sprite pack overall, and I think they achieved their aim. So now a little bit of tidying up of the flowers and of the mushrooms, adding some shadows here for consistency and moving things around to get ready for the next bunch of sprites. And just some cleaning up of the outlines here. Wasn't really sure if I should go with a full outline or a broken outline, but sometimes a broken outline adds a bit more variety, makes things look a little less polished and perfect and a little more wild, which is what we're going for here. Now, moving ahead to the next sprite, I wanted to do one more mushroom just to finish off this little set, and this time I did one facing the other direction.
Oh, Maisie, you are blowing my head full of amazing.
I know, apologies for that, but it's just the way I work. Now let's put some dots on this mushroom, make it look as mushroomy as possible. And as the ancient Greeks used to say,
"We are finished with those mushrooms."
What? They didn't say that? Oh well, they should have. Just some little grass sprigs around the bottom to help them meld into their environment. And now I go on a small crystal tangent, because I thought of adding crystals to this forest in a very 80s look. I mean, that color scheme, that right there is a ski jacket that my mum used to wear. Whoa, oh, the hair, it's just hair. Whew. Anyway, I went on this little crystal tangent for a few minutes and decided that they were kind of terrible. I don't know why. Now, in retrospect, looking back, I find them quite cool. But I guess they just didn't fit. And as you see them in combination with the other sprites, I think you'll agree, they just don't fit. So I spent way too long trying to refine them to make them fit, and in the end, deleted them. This is what happens. The life of a sprite, like I said. Now we're moving on to a slightly larger set piece, and this is an altar, basically. I wanted a small platform upon which an item could stand in ceremonial fashion, kind of like in the old Zelda games or what have you. And you can see I'm keeping that color scheme that I came up with before, the quote-unquote elvish forest theme, I will call it, sticking with these dark, moody kind of colors, which are somehow typically associated with elves in games. I don't really know why. In World of Warcraft, for example, the elves are always... there's a lot of purple going on there, purple and blue. I think they're very calming colors. I don't think they're very natural colors, so I find it odd that they always associate them with elves. But seeing as it's mostly night elves I think they're associated with, I guess it makes sense. Nighttime, purples, blues, dusky kind of dark colors, I suppose that's where they're heading with it. Anyway, all these human-made or humanoid-made structures will be in keeping with this forest, abandoned, ancient kind of theme, will be quite damaged and forlorn looking. So as you can see, I'm adding some damage marks, a couple of maybe erosion marks or some damage from old impacts, or simply wear and tear at the cruel hands of the elements. And adding these marks also helps with these kind of set pieces. All these small details help in adding some kind of story to the scene, whether it's theming your flowers with an odd alien kind of color scheme or damaging the ruins that you're building. In this case, some old stepping stones that are kind of off-kilter and a bit pushed up from the ground. All of these things, these small details, can tell a story, and especially in conjunction with the actual story in your game. But if you look at a Nintendo game, for example, Breath of the Wild is a fantastic example of this. If you look at the ruins that are scattered around, the amount of attention to detail that's gone into giving all of these set pieces their own little story in a way is just it's pretty remarkable. That's the Nintendo polish for you. And you can do it too. Also, part of the joy of making these little sprite packs, sometimes without much of a plan, is the discovery along the way. A lot of these little set pieces, I had ideas for a couple of them, but as I drew some, I got ideas for more, and off you go. And you can basically lose yourself in this little world of creativity where sprites spawn new ideas, which spawn new sprites, which spawn new ideas, and off you go. A little chain reaction of creativity. Now you can see I'm doing some larger discarded blocks, some damaged old chunks of stone. And one little trick I love doing, especially when you're on a limited palette like this, is making these objects look like they're embedded in the ground. And you can see this with the cobblestones, and you can see this with those larger blocks that I just made, where the grass is not actually drawn by me at all. All I do is put little gaps into the shadow. Actually, what I'm doing is, in a way, drawing the absence of grass, which leads around the bottom of the object. And if you do it with a little bit of finesse, you can get this effect where the object seems like it's embedded in the grass. And this is a cool, easy little trick for getting your stuff to sync better with the environment that you're going to put these objects into. And the added benefit of cutting these little bits out to simulate grass popping up is that no matter what surface you put them on, it will match the background, and it saves you a bit of time. You don't then have to go and match the color of the grass stalks for every game that you use these in or whatnot. So yes, here is where we ended up, and I'm quite happy with this little pack. I think we ended up in a good place. There is some good variety. There's a number of little sprite variations that I think could be quite cool in a little RPG.
Well, that's all from Plimby, Blingy, Chingy, Dungy, and Wingy. And myself. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and maybe you even learned something along the way. Write down in the comments if you'd like to see something specific in the future, and stay tuned for more videos. Until next time, I'm Jimzip.